Abigail went from a one stoplight town to being laid off twice to building the Boss Project into a 7-figure business recognized by INC and Forbes. Abigail, take me back to that moment when you were laid off, sitting with a paint bucket as your office. What was going through your head?
Well, I was in the middle of renovating my first home, and we had basically invested every penny we had into buying the place, and everything extra needed to go to renovating the place, which meant we had no furniture. And I would sit in my living room and prop up my laptop from college that was a dinosaur at the time, and would figure it out. It wasn't all that long afterwards that I actually bought a desk, but humble beginnings for sure.
Okay, what I'm really curious about is most people, when they get laid off from a job twice, immediately go searching for another job. Their brain is in fear mode. What am I going to do? You took a completely different route to this situation. I'm so curious what got you to that point of like, screw it, I'm going to do this thing.
Well, I had been in the corporate world, and I went from an agency to higher education, in-house corporate, and my last stop was a startup. And I was only at the startup for 3 months before they laid off the entire marketing department the same day. And so I was just kind of fried. I felt like I was jumping from one job to the next, and sure, making more, but at that point I was a production designer, and so they just wanted me to work. I was a doer, I was a worker bee. I was getting a bunch of stuff done every single day, which is great, but it's not a way to work up the ladder. And I had been overlooked for a couple of promotions at various jobs along the way, and mostly because of how young I was. And I was tired of that. I felt like I was ready for more challenge and wanted to make a bigger difference, but wasn't given the bandwidth or space to prove that I was capable. And part of it was I had a big ego and was super confident at the time. But I was like, I'll figure it out. And so I sat my husband down and had a conversation with him. And I said, give me 90 days. If I can't figure it out in 90 days, I'll go look for a quote normal job. But I think this is the time. Like, when else in our life are we going to have the least overhead possible? Like, we had purposely bought our first house so that we could afford it on one salary. And I had been laid off, but thank God, after he had been laid off for over 9 months, he got a job around the same time I had switched to the startup. And so we were good in theory, but we didn't have a backup plan. But we also didn't have kids. We didn't have really any major obligations. And I said, I just feel like I can do this. I feel like I can go build this thing. And 30 days later, I replaced my salary.
I have 2 questions for you right now.
Sure.
Okay. So most people start a business off and they go, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how I'm going to do this. You went in and say, give me 90 days. I'm going to figure this out. How did you develop this mindset of I'm going to figure it out?
Well, I think I had a pretty strong influence. My mom, ever since I was a little kid, she would tell me, you can do anything. You can do anything you set your mind to. You're smart, you're capable, and you're told that enough times and you believe it. And I was very confident that I could do it. You know, I think the thing with graphic design, a lot of art and creative careers, a lot of people pick up freelance jobs anyway while they're doing other things. And so it wasn't like I had never had a client before. It wasn't like I had never written a contract before. This wasn't completely brand new. Like I had already previously built a website for myself to market my services. I had clients, but I had moved cities. Like I was in a city I grew up in, but not a city I had ever looked for clients in. So I had no kind of base to work from. Um, but I knew how it would work. I knew what was required. And, you know, starting out, I made a lot of mistakes. Like, it wasn't to say that I was hitting the ground running perfectly. I was doing what would get me the most jobs the most quickly, i.e., I had no packages. Everything was custom. So if a business had any sort of design need, I would figure it out, whether that was a billboard or food packaging or a website or a branded photo shoot. I got it. Obviously, that was very unsustainable. And within 6 months, I had definitely developed a signature package and was only taking certain types of clients. But in the beginning, it was whatever I could get. And it helped that I didn't really stray from what I had been doing the last, you know, almost decade at that point. The work I was doing in the business was the work I was used to doing every single day inside other people's companies.
So many entrepreneurs, people that want to become entrepreneurs, immediately have this dream of building financial freedom. And that's why a lot of us get into the business that we do.
Mm-hmm.
But most people start off wanting to do a completely different side hobby, something they've never done. And because it's novel, it's new. Why did you decide to stick with the thing that you've been doing repeatedly? And then how did that impact your ability to generate sales and get yourself into a position where you are now?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, you working from a skill set that you already have is the fastest way to income. Like, if you have to learn a new skill, if you have to learn a new software, if you have to learn about a different industry, that's going to take time and effort and probably money. If you want to create a business that could take off tomorrow, it's going to be based on the skill set you already have. It doesn't have to be your exact title or the exact thing you're doing currently, but doing something adjacent, like very adjacent, something you're used to seeing on a daily basis or have some involvement in on a daily basis, is going to be a far faster transition. Now, I realize some people are in a position where they might have a do not compete, and that can feel like a challenge where, you know, well, I literally can't do what I am doing. And I encourage you to think about, is there a way to do what you're doing, but not for the same audience? And usually that gets around any sort of do not compete. As long as you're not competing for the same clients, they don't care. And so I went from serving, typically I was working in-house, to completely working with independent small businesses. And so there was no kind of competition for the types of things I was doing.
If someone listening today just lost their job, what's the first mindset shift they would need to make?
I think you have to remember that losing your job, more often than not, I wouldn't say all the time, but more often than not, has nothing to do with you or your skill set or your abilities. And I think a lot of people assume that if they're losing their job, they're, either unworthy or they're not doing a good job at their job or their performance is lacking in some way, it's usually either redundancy or quite legitimately overhead. Like they just can't afford you. Like you may be great, but they can't afford you, which, if anything, should be a compliment. If you're so great they can't afford you, that means you're so great that you can do whatever you want. And I think you have to be confident in your ability to do the thing you're trying to sell.
Abigail, I want to ask you a question. So you were raised with this upbringing of confidence in what we want to do. There are so, even me, when I started out, I had very little confidence in approaching these rooms. Even just the way I presented myself was something I had to rewrite. What would you tell someone who's at the beginning of this journey? How do I develop this confidence in myself?
Yeah. So the big thing is not apologizing for where you're at. You can't talk about, oh, I'm sorry, I'm, just getting started, or you're my first client, or, this is the first time I've ever done this. That just makes you come across as amateur, and you're not an amateur, or you wouldn't be starting to do this independently. Like amateurs don't do that. People who are experts in their field do that. And you have to present yourself as if this is something you know how to do, and you can get them the kind of results that they're paying for. You're solving whatever problem they're paying for. And I think if you're confident in your ability to get to the finish line, whatever you've objectively defined as the finish line, that can help steer you in the right direction. But how you speak about yourself matters. How you present yourself matters. And it's not to say that you have to be cocky. Like you don't have to come in and say, I'm the best in the industry. And like, I'm going to change everything. You don't want to overpromise. Like that's not what this is about. You don't have to, promise heaven on earth. Like you can be realistic about what you're suggesting will happen for them. In fact, I suggest you underpromise and overdeliver if you're going to do anything. But you speaking kindly about yourself to others is what matters.
I would have to agree with you. And changing your internal narrative is something that takes time and takes process. And what have you done to change this internal narrative in your head?
You really have to be focused on how you are looking at the world around you. So, if you are constantly looking at other people and what they're doing and comparing yourself and like seeing all the things you could be doing, but you're not, like, that's really hard. So one of the things I did early on was unfollow everyone in my industry. And I only followed people that I found inspirational that weren't in my industry. So a lot of like interior designers and home decorators and like comedians and people that just made me feel good. And it's not to say that I completely devoid myself from what was going on. Like you still have to have like a little bit of an idea of what's happening. You don't want to completely miss the boat, but I wasn't feeding that into my head all of the time. And I also really focus on what I'm like moving towards. Like I don't necessarily think of things as like goals and things that I'm not, but where am I going? And how can I be excited about where I'm going rather than see that as a lack thereof?
Completely agree. I think once you define the future you're going for, you can actually start to visualize it and create actions that lead towards it. And it just creates so much more happiness because you're going towards something that you can visualize and see.
Yeah. But it does require that you have the ability to see it. And everyone is going to get to a point where they can't see past it. And that's honestly where I started to struggle. When I got to the point that I was making more money than my friends and my family, and I owned a nicer home than any relative on both sides, I was like, what am I doing? Where do you go from here? Like, I don't know what more looks like. I had no example of how you can continue to like be wealthy and like give back and like be a good person. I started to have internal narratives about the way a rich or wealthy person was. And that was more of a problem later. So you do have to keep a handle on what you want, and that will change over time. You can't always move the needle, but at some point, you're going to get to the point where you don't know what it looks like after this. And after I checked all the boxes, as they say, I really started to wonder what that meant.
Where did you cultivate the ability after you hit this point of this is everything I've asked for? I've hit my peak moment. Why did you decide to? I want more. I want to do more.
So the funny thing is, I didn't. I built my business to the point that we had brought in millions of dollars. I had a team of 10. We had a group coaching program that was full and thriving. And I was living in my dream home. We had savings. I knew I was going to be able to retire reasonably. I could retire in the next 10 years. I would be 45 at that point. I decided that wasn't what I wanted to keep doing. Like, I didn't want to run a team of 10. I didn't want to be so focused on my business all of the time. And so now I have a smaller team. I work less. I do more things that are creative and give me life rather than just doing things that financially earn more money. And my business is smaller as a result, but I am so much happier and I'm still completely fine financially.
So, do you prioritize happiness?
No, I actually think prioritizing happiness is a mistake. Happiness is a fleeting feeling. Like, you see a butterfly, or, your friends are laughing, or, you see a puppy, whatever. You get that smirk on your face. It's it's a burst of good energy. What I strive for is contentment. I want to feel peaceful and spacious and calm and not stressed. Whatever the opposite of stressed is, that's what I'm going for.
So, you have this philosophy of designing your business around your life.
Mhm.
And I want to take a step back. Why, how did that philosophy evolve? What caused this philosophy of let's create an integration of business and life?
Well, pretty early on in my business, I was involved in a 5-car collision and I suffered a traumatic brain injury.
I'm
And
sorry.
it was incredibly hard. And I was in a position where we had decided to pursue litigation because we were very concerned about my long-term health trajectory. And because of that, they say everything can and will be used against you in the court of law. And so it meant I couldn't say anything about how I was feeling, what was going on in my personal life. I basically had to shut off that part of me and just keep going. But the business I had at the time wasn't sustainable for someone who was only capable of working part-time due to my health. And I knew focusing on my health was my number one priority. but that meant the business had to change in order to accommodate that. And there is no way I could have made the level of accommodations I have in this business if I was working a traditional job. It just simply would not have been possible.
How do you think that that accident changed your outlook on life, relationships, business?
Life is short, and relationships are far more meaningful than any amount of money. Experiences are far more meaningful than any amount of money. And, having money isn't the point. Being a good person who gives back to the world and makes some sort of difference, even if it's small. Like, I'm not saying everyone needs to go be Mother Teresa. That is completely unreasonable. I think you can just be a good person. Like, you can, put someone's cart away at the grocery store. Like, you can smile at someone on the street. Like, no one's asking for this big lift from you, but you have to show up. And if you continually focus on everything being about you or how big you can make this thing for you, like, I just think it's ignoring the bigger picture. In fact, I think that's shitty. If you build a business around my priorities, like, why would you do that? That makes no sense. And that can sound logical, but there's plenty of people out there that like start admiring a coach or someone online, and then they just try to copy everything they're doing. And I was like, do you have the same priorities? Are you trying to build a business in the same manner to like sacrifice the same things or prioritize the same things? If not, like, why are you spending so much time, energy, or potentially money trying to recreate what they're doing? Like, you have to be focused on what's important to you. That is going to make the biggest difference in how you feel when you're working.
When all of this happened, it changed your entire perspective on how you run a business, how you show up in relationships, how you care for your community, how your why.
Hmm.
What are the things that you won't compromise as a result?
Family will always be first. And it's been hard. I haven't necessarily had the same journey as many. I've gone through a lot while running this business, not just with my own health, but my parents went through a divorce in the middle of COVID after they'd been married for 42 years. Um, Around the same time, we took on full-time caregiving for my husband's grandmother who had progressive Alzheimer's. Last year, my dad had a stroke and ended up in long-term care, and he's only 65. But every time one of those things happened, I was in a position where I could dial stuff back, and I wasn't putting myself in harm's way by doing so. I could still focus on what was necessary and put my family first in all of those scenarios, even if it meant walking away from work for days or weeks at a time.
Something I want to talk about is that, especially as entrepreneurs and people in business, so many things happen all at once. And sometimes we hit those points where life just seems to hit everything at once. That is one, for lack of better words, hell of a journey. And how is your mind? Like, what have you done in this situation to show up for your business, but also still be able to show up for your family?
Sometimes it's not perfect. I mean, a lot of the times it's not perfect. Like, even if I'm prioritizing them, it doesn't necessarily mean I won't occasionally have like a late night. Like, if I leave in the middle of the day to go help them with something and I still have something to do, I get it done. The difference being I haven't made the whole business dependent on me being at my desk 8 hours a day. You know, I may have a few things to catch up on. I may have a few, you know, wild hairs to catch or whatever, but I'm not doing so that so much so that like there's no way I could catch up. Like there's just enough that's still dependent on me on a day-to-day basis that sometimes, depending on what it is, I can even handle it remotely. Like I can answer questions or Slack my team and, you know, get enough done that it doesn't ultimately impact anything. But there's still going to be hard seasons, you know, especially after the accident. The business I had wasn't sustainable and I was trying to recover. Like, so I was rebuilding how my entire business worked while I was in physical therapy and cognitive therapy and, you know, massage therapy and going to the chiropractor and getting Botox treatments. And like, I was in doctor's offices sometimes 4 to 6 hours a day. And that's a lot of time. And I was sick enough that after that, you know, I needed to go to sleep or, you know, be in a dark room and just be. But it still meant some days I had to power through when I was sick. But the hope is obviously that at some point you can prepare your business enough that that doesn't have to be the thing. Like you don't have to keep doing that. You don't have to keep sacrificing forever. And ideally, you don't end up in a situation as extreme as I'm in and you prepare your business before, you know, shit completely hits the fan. That's the ideal situation. I just had it happen in the wrong order. You know, life happened and I had to figure it out.
What was your why?
I just needed it to be easier. I needed it to have less of me in the mix. I needed my team to be able to handle things or things to be automated so I didn't have to handle them at all. I needed the ability to work with multiple clients simultaneously without me having to be at every meeting, you know? I went from running a design agency to running an education company, which are obviously very different things, but I shifted from a one-to-one model to a one-to-many model, and it took time. I had to build an audience that was eager enough to have enough sales that I could make that work financially, and that still took time. But the thing that made it work is it could be more asynchronous. It could be more on my own schedule without it being like I have this harsh deadline. I have a client expecting an email from me. I have a client expecting a deliverable from me. I could do it when I felt a little bit better and I could rest when I didn't.
So many business owners are stuck in the day-to-day cycle of I'm surviving with my business, not thriving at all. And what what is one thing you wish more people were brave enough to talk about in this space?
I really think we need to talk about pricing a lot more. We need to talk about the math to make it all make sense and make it all work. There's really no reason people need to be struggling. Like the majority of people have skills that are valuable enough that if you have the right ideal client and the right package, you don't need a ton of clients to make this all make sense. Now, obviously, if you're transitioning to one-to-many and you're selling at a lower price point, you're going to need more people to sell to. That's just part of the equation. You need a bigger audience. And so I wish more people talked about realistically what that meant. Like if you're selling something $29 at a time versus $20,000 at a time, It's a pretty big range in terms of number of people you have to sell to.
I'm scared if I price my service at this price, nobody's going to want it. I'm not good enough to price my package as this. I mean, what would you do? What would you tell an entrepreneur who says, I can't price my thing at this, it's too much?
Well, I used to kind of fall into the camp where, you gotta charge what you're worth and blah, blah, blah. But that's BS.
Do you think that's bullshit?
It is. It is. I think the bigger issue is that people are selling more often than not to the wrong audience. And
Interesting.
I think pricing on like a maximum is typically up to the point of 15% of someone's available expendable income. So, for example, if you had a $1,500 a month retainer, you would need to be working with a business that's making at least $10,000 a month for that to be reasonable. Now, the more money they make, the more reasonable that is, but also potentially the more you could raise your prices to kind of match expectations. People tend to want to work with clients that are more fun and more interesting, and those aren't always the most lucrative opportunities.
So would you say stop prioritizing the funsies of clients and look at it as a holistic, this is business, we're going to do business, and I can design my life outside of it?
Yeah. If you treat it like a business, other people will respect it in the same way. And if you are just always trying to make everything fun, then it feels like you're playing around and you're not actually like doing anything that's important. And now it does depend on if you're selling to other businesses or consumers. If you're selling to other businesses, I think there's a level of seriousness that's required. If you're selling to consumers, like, this is a totally different ball game. Like, you got to be, at this point, an entertainment company to thrive at all in today's economy. But if you're selling business to business, you can hold yourself a little more serious. But the more you're selling one to many, the more the type of content you have to shift, the more you have to show up in a different kind of way. So it depends on what you're selling, who you're selling it to, and how many of those people you need to convert. It changes how you need to show up.
If you could give one tip to an audience trying to shift into content with selling, let's start with one-to-one and then one-to-many. What tips would you give them?
So if you're selling one-to-one content that's selling, I need you to be thinking about your content more like your portfolio. So you showcasing your work in a way that other people have transparency into the kind of quality of work and the kind of results that you're providing your client. That's going to be the most important. If someone's going to your social media, they're vetting you, right? They're not trying to be educated, because if you're selling one-to-one, they want it done for them anyway. So they want to see that you're capable, right? Now, if you're selling one-to-many, they need to trust you, but only to a certain extent. They just need to trust you enough that you can get results for them. Some people go too far where they're so focused on trust that they're not even getting to the point. Like, they're not even selling at all. And so I do think you have to capture people's attention and kind of move to a different platform. And so usually you're going to have a certain platform that's specific to attraction marketing, top of funnel marketing, but you may have a different channel altogether that's middle of funnel marketing where you are more sales focused or nurture focused or both. It doesn't mean you won't convert on top of funnel, but you're like typically converting to a lead magnet or a low price paid entry point offer.
Are there any sales tactics that you refuse to use?
Yes. There's so many. Now, it's not that any sales tactic is bad. I think it's how you do it, really. Are cold DMs bad? Not necessarily. Like, you can absolutely be excited about working with someone and showcase that you're interested and potentially even have someone introduce you to a cold lead, right? And that doesn't make it gross, but like you saying, hey, I have this AI funnel that's going to change your DMs forever. All cocky, like that's a throwaway. Like, why are you doing that? Are you even getting any clients that way? I'm so confused. So I'm not a huge fan of cold messaging. It is effective if done appropriately. It is not bad. I don't want to do it. I'm not interested in doing it. I am, humble brag, like quite good at a sales call, but it's very time consuming. So I have no interest in doing them unless I'm selling into a high-end service. I don't need to do that for a low-end offer.
One, I want to preface this by saying I actually did cold DMs today, and it's a very painful process because originally when you go into it, a lot of people want to take something from someone. They want business immediately and aren't exchanging value. So when someone is cold DMing you, what are the things that you look for?
Well, at this point, I don't want your script written by AI. Like, I can tell, and it's so annoying when I'm like, you didn't even try. You didn't even make an effort. I'm not saying you can't get a rough draft from AI or start there, but it's just lazy to send exactly what AI generates. But I'm specifically looking for that even a little bit what I do and ultimately the kind of business I run. And, don't just give me ideas because you do something similar for other people in my industry. Do you know what I do at all? Like, did you look at my product suite? Have you listened to my podcast? If you don't know anything about me, then I'm not actually a lead.
You said so yourself that sales processes and sales calls are very time consuming. So for a business owner coming in, trying to figure out what is worth my time and what's not worth my time, walk me through what you prioritizing your day to day.
So, I mean, you do need to be prioritizing sales activities, like things that convert into financial means of any kind. Like, those should be your top priorities in your business. It's really easy to get into the fun stuff or the administrative stuff or the planning stuff, but that's not what moves the needle, and that's not what's going to make more sales. So you being aware of what brings in sales, brings in clients, converts people, and prioritizing that on a consistent basis is going to move the needle the most. Now, I'm not saying don't do sales calls. I'm just saying don't do sales calls that aren't worth your time. Like, if I can go in and I know I convert, between 70 and 80% of the time, and I'm selling a $20,000 offer or a $30,000 offer, that's worth my time. I convert 70% of the time at 20 grand. Like, that buys a lot of bandwidth. Now, I'm not currently doing any projects of that scale because I just don't want to. But when I had projects that big, heck yeah, I was jumping on a sales call because it was worth my time.
There are so many entrepreneurs who have this massive dream for financial freedom. This is what they're in it for. Why do you think that there is a big problem in the space with people underpricing their services, not knowing their sales conversions and numbers, and not prioritizing sales tasks?
Well, I think a lot of people are smart in their particular skill set, but sales is not necessarily something that everyone is just good at out of the gate. It's something you have to practice. It's something you have to work towards. You have to get better over time and spend more time and attention on developing that skill. But I also think that people ultimately are putting themselves in a position where they are doing things that they don't have skills for and trying to make it work. They're trying to wedge, a square peg in a round hole, so to speak. And it's not to say you can't get there, but you need to be doing things you do know how to do right now and work on those skills that you don't know how to do. That's hard. And unless you have enough resources in terms of time investment or money to just grind through, like that's how startups work. Startups start with cash with the plan that they're going to be really bad at something until they're not. And they literally, it's called like they burn it.
Right.
It's a burn rate, right? They're burning cash. Most entrepreneurs don't have the ability to burn cash. Like they have to live on cash. And so you need to be doing activities that don't burn through what you do have. Like you have to be resourceful and pay attention and like reinvest in areas that are getting you more results. Do more of what's working, not do more of what you don't know how to do.
What was the biggest needle mover from going from 6 figures to 7 figures in your company?
I mean, the biggest needle mover is definitely price point. Like people assume I'm just going to increase the volume on what I have, but a healthy product mix with a high-end offer at the end of that product mix is going to be the fastest way to get there. And you can look around and be like, oh, I don't know how these people do it. I don't know how they're surviving on this $497 offer. Either they're not, or they have offers that you don't see. Like that they are selling behind the scenes that are behind the curtain. They're not listed on their website. And they're converting those either with a sales team on the back end or, offering it to specific clients, or once they get through X point, they're doing something else with them. But, most people, unless they're running a completely solo business, are reliant on things $500 and under. Like if they're running $1 million plus business, there is, I promise you, something that is somewhere between $5,000 and $30,000.
If someone is looking to escape the trap of staying stuck in this 6-figure business, what would you recommend that they do in order to create something as an offer at that scale, or to position something at a higher price?
Well, I think those are two different things entirely. Like if you're going to position something at a higher price, you likely need to speak to my friend Mariah Kosh, who calls it, talking to your champagne clients. You got to speak to the people that are at the tippy top, that are like the most prime, that are the most ready. You can't speak to the problems of the person that's like nowhere near ready to invest in that kind of thing. You got to speak the language of the people that are potentially even past that thing and then realize they have an issue. And when you're consistently talking to the right room, that's what's going to make the biggest difference. And the thing that people get confused about with that, and this is not my concept, this is her concept. When you are consistently talking to that, the people who are not there yet, they are listening. It's not to say that they're ignoring you or like scrolling past. In fact, they might be absorbing it more because they're like, well, I'm not there yet. And if that's what it looks like when I'm there, then like I need to be paying attention. So speaking to the right client makes a really big difference, regardless of what you're ultimately selling. But this comes down to relationships. Like, you can talk all day long, but if you don't know any of these people, you're not going to convert these people. The higher the price point, the more intimate the relationship, the more important it is that you are fully aware of how the other person operates, and you trust them to fulfill on what they say they're going to do. Now, it's not to say that certain businesses don't just drop a pretty penny and not worry about it, but those are typically, Fortune 500 companies, not the average small business owner. The ones that are dropping cash and not worrying about it are not typically the people scrolling on social media, which is kind of the point. Like, if you want to sell at a certain price point, people think social media is the only thing. No, like, post on social. I'm not saying don't. Like, you have to be kind of like up on it, right? You have to be you can't, like, people can't come there and see you haven't posted in 2 years. They're gonna be like, what are you doing?
You gotta be relevant.
You have to be relevant. You have to have some thought leadership. But if you're selling beyond a certain price point, or you're selling beyond a certain ideal client, it is networking. It is knowing who these people are. It is getting in front of them. However you have to do that. Maybe you invest more in conferences. Maybe you spend more time understanding what roles you need to be talking to. Because a lot of people assume, oh, I just need to always talk to like the CEO. No, you don't. A lot of the times, the bigger the business, that is the worst idea. Like, if you're trying to, for example, land a brand deal to like talk about XYZ business on social, you don't talk to the CEO. You talk to the person who's head of brand partnerships. That is literally their title. You got to know who those people are. Maybe if it's a smaller company, it's like head of marketing or CMO, but most of the time you're trying to talk to the wrong person.
Know the right people. Know the right people.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that the people who you surround yourself with affect your financial outlook on life and in your business?
Oh, for sure. For sure. If your friends are broke and they're all struggling and they're all complaining and they're bitching about whatever, like, you're just gonna like stay in a cycle, and it's hard. Like, there is a certain point where you potentially have to lose friends to get to where you want to go, and a lot of people don't want to do that, and it's fine. Like, if you don't want to do that, then like I don't expect you will keep growing, or if you do, you are gonna feel less and less like you belong in that room, and less relevant. You're going to enjoy your time less in that room, which means you just need new people. I used to be worried about who my friends were and how they would come into my life, but it's less about trying to like hunt down the right people and create opportunities for you to meet the kind of people that you want to be around. You can be intentional about that. You don't need to be intentional about finding the right person. Like, that's not great. Like, for example, I have a lot of online friends, but most of them live all over the country, some all over the world. and I don't hang out with them in real life. Like, maybe if we're at the same conference, we go to dinner together or, catch up, but we'll do Zoom dates here and there, but it's not the same as like having those in-person connections. So I was getting really frustrated that the friends that I had didn't understand my life. Like, they didn't understand what it was like being a business owner, because they weren't a business owner. They were doing other things. And so I started following more people that consider themselves an entrepreneur, and they're literally adding their location and it's close to where I live. I literally just today I went to coffee with a realtor that lives 15 minutes from my house, but she's crushing it. Like, she's like, the average realtor is maybe selling 4 houses a year. She's selling 4 to 6 houses a month. And she relates more to my life than a ton of people I run into on a day-to-day basis. And we met on social media because that's how I do work, and that's how she does work.
What's one bold move you made that has looked absolutely crazy at the time, but has changed everything for you?
One bold move. I mean, I've made a lot of bold moves, so it's hard to pick just one, but I've made a lot of pivots over time. And it's hard to say that there's one specific one that made all of the difference in the world. But I think a lot of people can get stuck in a rut where they are trying to keep doing what they've always done, and the results are just not what they used to be. And you do have to evolve. Like, technology, for example, is not the same as when I started 10 years ago. Like, if I was using the same strategies to reach people online, I would look like a dinosaur. Like, you got to keep moving. Like, you have to stay up on what the latest technology is, the latest strategies. And you don't have to implement all of them, but you do have to keep learning. I got to the point where I was worried that I would, kind of become like my parents' generation or even my grandparents' generation, where they're like, kids these days, I don't want to learn another thing. I don't want to be like that. I want to keep learning. I want to keep investing in that. And does it get old sometimes? Yeah, it does. Like, when TikTok started, I was like, no, I love this for entertainment. I love TikTok. But I was like, I really don't want to have to learn how to do this as a business. I just don't. And it's not to say I have to. Like, it is an option. And I'm aware it's an option, and I know how I could pursue it as an option. But choosing not to do it is a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And you can make some of those choices, but choosing to do none of the new things is probably a really bad move.
I have one last question for you. Is 10 years from now, what do you want people to talk about you when they say Abagail? And my next thing is what is the legacy you want to leave behind?
So I'm less worried if they talk about a course that I sold or, some change that happened in their business. I hope, if anything, they talk about how I changed how they think about themselves or their business or the way they show up, not, some specific strategy or like funnel I taught them, or, how I taught them to grow their email list or build a digital product. I don't care about that. I care that they spent more time with their kids, or that they went on that vacation, or that they were able to plan for retirement and like retire early. Like, I care more about that. And as far as legacy goes, like, I don't really care if anyone remembers my name, but if more entrepreneurs have more space in their life and they get to do more of what they love because I existed online, amazing.
Abigail, thank you for your time. It was an honor to be able to speak with you.
Thank you so much. I had a great time, and you have great questions.